You're watching Talking Points, a focus on the political scene in Lubbock and across the South Plains.
Welcome back. Here's a look at some of the political headlines of the past week. The nominees now set for the Lubbock County Justice of the Peace race for Precinct 4. Lance Cancino gets the vote of the Republican committee members of that precinct. He'll face new Democratic candidate Gracie Gomez in November. And LISD parents will also vote in November on a $130 million school bond proposal. If it passes, Jackson, Guadalupe, and Wright elementary schools would merge into one brand new school, and some $40 million will pay for extra security measures for all Lubbock schools. Dr. Wayne Havens helped write the bond. He tells us none of this will increase your property taxes, likely due to projected growth, but we will see about that. Back to the tech campus controversy, and the poor guy caught up in the middle of all this. Health Sciences Center President Dr. Ted Mitchell was asked to bring his impeccable credentials to the role of interim chancellor and see if he can save the PR disaster of the recent weeks. A tough job that only gets tougher from there, as KMAC's Tori Larned returns to show us.
Interim Chancellor Dr. Ted Mitchell says he's focusing on the upcoming legislative session. There are 3 things he will work hard to get approved by lawmakers: a dental school in El Paso, a mental health institute here in town, and a veterinarian school in Amarillo.
Because the people of this region need it desperately, and they need our help to do that.
But Mitchell will hold the responsibilities of a president and a chancellor. So how will he be effective in both?
I've got people over there that I can really rely upon heavily to do things. And the way the schedules, we're trying to mesh the schedules right now, and so I'll be back and forth. The good news is, between the offices, it's not very far.
Mitchell says his close relationship and mentorship from Chancellor Duncan has prepared him for this role. But with tensions running high,
there are a lot of conversations that people are having about things that I wasn't privy to, the presidents weren't privy to. I don't know what was said. It is not going to impact what we need to do for the legislative session.
He says more responsibility is in his hands.
Is it a little more sensitive now? Sure. Is it any different for what we need to do? No, it's not.
Tori Larned, KMAC News.
All right, thank you. And John Frullo is the Lubbock representative for House District 84. It's always good to see you.
Good to see you, Ryan.
Dr. Mitchell is a rock-solid person, and he's making plans to do some work in the next legislative session. But just in terms of experience, I mean, let's face it, he's not Bob Duncan. How much support from you and from others in the legislature from here in the area is he going to need to be effective here?
Well, I think all of us will continue to have to work together. I think Dr. Mitchell, is a great guy. He's active in the process. One of the things I really respect about Dr. Mitchell is he understands the business side. And if you look at what he has done with the Health Science Center, over the time period that he's had it, it's looked at, okay, what makes sense, what makes business sense, how do we run this, and how do we make it work on its own? And so he's done a great job on that. So I think that, he's familiar with all of us, he's worked with us, he understands the process, nowhere near what Duncan did. Duncan used to write that budget. He can explain the budget. He knew the budget inside and out. Very few people know the budget the way Duncan does. And so, I think from that standpoint, there's a learning curve there. But, I look forward to continuing to work with Dr. Mitchell.
Have you talked to Bob Duncan since all this broke?
Well, I talked to him Monday evening, and that's been about it. I hadn't reached out to him. I've heard that, from other people that, it's a difficult time, but, he poured so much into that job, both into tech, both on the legislative side and as chancellor.
Have you talked to regents about what happened and how things seemed to get so crossways with Mr. Duncan in this whole process?
A little bit. We saw what Rick Francis put in the paper, and my discussion with Chairman Francis was somewhat similar. It had to do with the administrative budget, and as well as what he's calling the shared vision.
But and you mentioned about how well Bob Duncan knew how budgets worked, and in fact he used to write those things in Austin when he was down there. That's what doesn't make sense, I think, to so many people. And I want to know what you think about this. He's the budget guy. There are negotiations. Why didn't that work?
I wasn't in the room, so I couldn't tell you. I wasn't part of the meetings that, in essence, they say have led up to that.
Do you believe that regents were influenced by outside sources to try to back away from some sort of legislative fight on vet school funding or funding for whatever projects going on?
Well, that would just be speculation on my part. What I can say is during last session, we were working on the vet school. It was going forward. On the House side in particular, we had, I believe, $6 million going towards the vet school. After a while, that was, quote, put on pause by Texas Tech University. It was not put on pause by me.
Right.
And several other of my colleagues, and we kept working on it. Ultimately, again, that $6 million ended up being in the House budget. The Senate went over. Initially, they did not have any. When it went through the committee conference process, we ended up with $4.2 or $4.17 million going to the vet school to look at getting it going. So I think it was something that we did, even though it was put on pause.
Mm-hmm. Is there support, and a lot of people are kind of wondering this, and I'm getting a lot of questions about this too, is there any support for an ethics investigation of some sort into tech regions by members of the legislature, either now or once we get started back in Austin?
Well, there is a committee that's set up for that, for the ethics and investigation, and they would just have to look at that, see what what information they have, if there is something there, and then go forward with it. They have done that in the past.
Sure. Should there be a mechanism to investigate or recall a region if something should come up out of this?
You know, I think that everybody needs to be held accountable. We all need to be held accountable, and if something was done and is improper or perceived to be improper, I think it needs to be either looked at and investigated and found out. As far as, you know, as we start adding more rules like that, then we get into problems with that is used as a tool to punish somebody. And I don't think that we want to set up things like that where there is a way to gotcha, you know, to go and get somebody for doing something that you didn't agree with. And so I think we need to be very careful about doing that. But if there were things that were done incorrectly or things that happened that those of us that are living in this community, concerned for tech, want to see tech continue to do well, need to know, then that should be brought out in the open.
And people, of course, have noticed as all this has played out that no one on the board now lives anywhere near Lubbock. They did it in the past, not in this particular group. Should that be some sort of a requirement?
I think it should be. I think that there needs to be something done because it brings that flavor of the community into that boardroom. When people come into town, they have their meetings. I'm not saying that they don't understand it. A lot of them have attended tech. They have you know, children that attend tech. They have a relationship with tech, but there's a big difference between having people that are in the community, live in the community, and know the interaction between tech and Lubbock. And there's a lot of interaction in there. There's a lot of partnerships that are formed, and there's a lot of synergy, and we need to make sure that there is a representation of that in that board meeting.
The final few seconds we have before I don't want to let you leave without finding out what's going on with you. I know you're back and forth to Austin. Sure. What's going on with some of the committees down in Austin that you're a part of?
Well, we're all pretty much trying to wrap up the interim committees that we have, the committee meetings, so trying to get that done, get the reports written, and then of course getting ready for next session. That's a big part of it. We've got the budget work that's starting, you know, talking about bills that are going to be filed, both in our committee, things that we need to be worried about, concerned about, things we're watching out for. The work really never stops because we're not meeting.
Yeah, and that's always the truth. He never stops, so we're glad to get him for just a few minutes. John Frulo from House District 84. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Brian. Thank you.
And straight ahead, diving headfirst into the challenges faced by rural Texans in the 21st century, a day-long symposium hosted by Lubbock's congressman. We'll take you there next on Talking Points.